Deep in the shadows of the galaxy, where truth becomes indistinguishable from lies and loyalty transforms into betrayal with the ease of a serpent shedding its skin, there exists a figure so enigmatic that even his own death might be a deception. Among the 20 demigod sons of the Emperor of Mankind, one stands apart not through raw strength or psychic might, but through an almost supernatural mastery of subterfuge and misdirection. This is the story of Alpharius Omegon, the Primarch who might have been the first discovered or the last, who fought for the Emperor by betraying him, and who died at least twice yet might still walk among the living. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, Alpharius represents something even more unsettling than the horrors of chaos or the alien menace. He represents the terrifying reality that you can never truly know who your enemies are, or perhaps more disturbingly, who your friends might be. The tale of Alpharius begins, as all Primarch stories do, with the Emperor's grand genetic experiment during the closing years of the Age of Strife in the 30th millennium. Within gene laboratories buried deep beneath the Himalayan mountains on Terra, the Master of Mankind crafted 20 superhuman beings, each designed to be a perfect general, a living weapon of unparalleled capability. But where the other Primarchs were singular entities, towering figures of unmistakable presence, Alpharius was different from the moment of creation. For Alpharius was not one, but two. The twin Primarchs Alpharius and Omegon represented a unique anomaly in the Emperor's design, whether by intention or cosmic accident remains one of the setting's enduring mysteries. These identical twins describe themselves as possessing one soul split between two bodies, a duality that would define every aspect of their existence and the legion they would come to command. When the Chaos Gods reached through the veil of reality and scattered the infant Primarchs across the galaxy, in an attempt to thwart the Emperor's plans for galactic conquest, Alpharius and Omegon were separated not just from their father, but from each other. This separation would last decades, and the circumstances of where each twin landed differs so dramatically that reconciling the various accounts becomes an exercise in frustration. According to one narrative, presented by Alpharius himself in what he later admitted was a fabrication, he was actually the first Primarch to be recovered by the Emperor. In this telling, the infant Alpharius materialized not on some distant world, but on Terra itself, specifically on the Jaranum plateau outside the Proto-Imperial Palace. The Emperor supposedly found him there, having to eliminate a group of scavengers to preserve the secret. Raised in absolute secrecy alongside Malcador the Sigillite, this version of Alpharius became a hidden weapon, an invisible hand guiding events from the shadows while his brother, Primarchs, were discovered one by one across the galaxy. In this account, young Alpharius learned directly from the Emperor the importance of sacrificing individual glory for the greater good, the necessity of secrecy in all operations, and the cold calculus that sometimes requires terrible acts for the preservation of humanity. He became a master of infiltration so skilled that he could disguise himself as a simple space marine of the First Legion during the Palace coup, later testing the security of the Custodian Guard by attempting to assassinate the Emperor himself in a quasi-blood game that brought him to the attention of Constantine Valdor. During the Great Crusade, this secret Primarch supposedly accompanied his father to the discoveries of several of his brothers, standing in disguise as Lionel Johnson and Lorgar first met their creator. All the while, he commanded the mysterious Ghost Legion, the 20th Space Marine Legion that operated without official Primarch leadership, conducting black operations that left no witnesses and bore no identifying marks. They became whispers, urban legends among the expeditionary fleets, a force that struck from nowhere and vanished into myth. But this entire narrative might be nothing more than smoke and mirrors, another layer in the endless deception that defines the Alpha Legion. The more commonly accepted version of events places Alpharius as the last Primarch to be discovered, found by Horus Lupercal himself rather than the Emperor. Even this account has variants, with some sources suggesting the Emperor was present at the discovery, while others maintain it was Horus alone who located his youngest brother. What remains consistent is that by the time Alpharius officially took command of the 20th Legion, the Great Crusade was already well underway, and his brother Primarchs had established their reputations and their methods of war. The 20th Legion, designated simply as Alpha, in records predating their Primarch's arrival, had already carved out a reputation as exceptional operators, taller than standard Space Marines and possessed of a cunning intelligence that set them apart. While Alpharius's whereabouts during his formative years remained shrouded in contradiction and deliberate misinformation, Omegon's early life follows a clearer if no less strange path. The second twin materialized on an empty, nameless world, a desolate rock orbiting a dying star. Alone on this barren planet, the infant demigod grew to maturity with only himself for company, yet somehow came to understand that he was a manufactured being, created for a purpose beyond simple existence. On this abandoned world, Omegon discovered an artifact that would become his signature weapon, the Xenos-crafted Pale Spear, a weapon of unknown origin and terrible power. When a group of human pirates landed on his world, the young Primarch didn't call out for rescue or companionship. Instead, he used his superhuman abilities to steal their ship, teaching himself to pilot the vessel and navigate the stars through nothing but innate genius and determination. He then began a long journey toward Imperial-held systems, following rumours and legends of the Emperor, of Primarchs, and of the Space Marines. This solitary journey shaped Omegon differently than it might have shaped his twin, creating a figure perhaps more introspective, more willing to work alone, more comfortable in isolation. The reunion of the twins occurred on the world of Barsaver during the Rangdan Xenocides, one of the most devastating conflicts of the Great Crusade that nearly brought the Imperium to its knees. Alpharius, having received intelligence about a figure matching descriptions of himself, led a squad through hordes of sloth to reach the planet's surface. There, battling the Xenos alone with nothing but the Pale Spear and his wits, stood Omegon. The moment the twins laid eyes on each other, recognition was instantaneous and profound. They knew each other in a way that transcended mere resemblance, felt the completion of something that had been incomplete since their scattering. From that moment forward, they would operate as two halves of a whole, perfectly synchronized in thought and action, able to coordinate strategies with minimal communication. They speculated about their nature, wondering if the Emperor had deliberately created them as twins, or if they had somehow split during their passage through the warp. Neither explanation could be confirmed, and the Emperor himself never clarified the matter, if indeed he ever knew the full truth of what had happened to his 20th son. The physical appearance of Alpharius Omegon represented another departure from Primarch norms, where most of the Emperor's gene-forged sons stood as giants among giants, towering figures who could be identified at a glance by their superhuman stature and presence. The twins were notably smaller. At approximately 8 to 9.5 feet tall, they were still larger than standard Space Marines, but they represented the smallest of all the Primarchs. This relative lack of height became a tactical advantage rather than a weakness. Alpharius in particular could pass among his legionaries with minimal additional effort, wearing standard power armour that differed little from his warriors. His bald head, copper-tinged skin, and heavy brow gave him a passing resemblance to Horus Lupercal, though his eyes were distinctive, seeming to shift colour from cold Arctic blue to shimmering green depending on the light and angle. Both twins maintained this similar appearance, allowing them to switch places with ease, and they went further by ensuring that select members of their legion underwent cosmetic gene sculpting to increase their height and modify their features to match the Primarchs even more closely. This created the foundation for one of the Alpha Legion's most famous and frustrating characteristics. When asked his name, any Alpha Legionnaire might respond, "I am Alpharius," and in a sense this was true. The Legion embodied their Primarch's philosophy of collective identity over individual glory. During official functions and meetings with other legions, Alpharius would frequently swap places with Omegon, or even with specially prepared body doubles from among his warriors. observers would see what appeared to be the Primarch of the 20th Legion, never knowing if they addressed Alpharius, Omegon, or merely a very tall space marine with a modified face. This shell game extended to battlefield operations, where the true Alpharius might be hidden within a tactical squad, while a decoy wearing ornate armour drew enemy attention elsewhere. The psychological impact on their opponents was devastating. How do you decapitate a command structure when you can never be certain which head is the real one? How do you focus your forces when the enemy commander might be anywhere or nowhere? The armour worn by the twins reflected this philosophy of hidden in plain sight. The Pythian scales, Alpharius's warplate, drew its design from ancient Terran mythology, specifically the multi-headed hydra that gave the Legion its symbol and doctrine. This artificer armour could certainly be ornate and intimidating when the situation demanded theatrical presence, decorated with hydra-scale patterns and serpentine imagery, but it could just as easily be stripped down to appear as standard Mark IV power armour. The pale spear that Omegon discovered on his desolate birth world became the signature weapon of whichever twin wielded it, a double-headed spear of Xenos manufacture that could punch through ceramite with ease and strike faster than most could follow. Some accounts describe Alpharius wielding the Hydra's spite, an Archaeotech plasma blaster of unknown provenance, though whether this was truly his weapon or another piece of misdirection remains uncertain. The Alpha Legion's methods of warfare set them apart from every other Space Marine Legion during the Great Crusade. While forces like the World Eaters revelled in close assault, and the Imperial Fists excelled at siege warfare, while the Ultramarines perfected combined arms doctrine, and the Word-Bearers brought worlds to compliance through faith, the 20th Legion operated in the spaces between conventional military operations. They were masters of intelligence gathering, infiltration, psychological warfare, and surgical strikes timed for maximum strategic effect. Their preferred method of operation, which they termed the harrowing, involved extensive preparation that could take weeks or even months. Agents would infiltrate the target world long before any Space Marines arrived, recruiting or coercing locals, spreading disinformation, sabotaging infrastructure, and creating conditions of paranoia and uncertainty. Networks of informants and turncoats would be established, sometimes without those involved even knowing they worked for the Alpha Legion. Only when the target was sufficiently compromised would the actual military strike begin, and even then, it would come from 100 different directions simultaneously, making it impossible for defenders to identify the main thrust of the assault. Command and control assets would be eliminated, not through direct attack but through infiltration and assassination. Supplies would vanish, reinforcements would receive contradictory orders, and leaders would discover their most trusted advisors were enemy agents. By the time the Alpha Legion revealed their full presence, the enemy's capacity for organised resistance had already collapsed. The final assault, the harrowing itself, often resembled a mop-up operation more than a proper battle, with elite Terminators and heavy armour sweeping through disorganised defenders. This approach maximised efficiency while minimising Alpha Legion casualties, and it ensured that conquered worlds came into Imperial compliance with their infrastructure largely intact. It was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly at odds with the honour-bound warfare practiced by legions like the Ultramarines and Imperial Fists. This divergence in military philosophy created friction with Alpharius's brother Primarchs, particularly Robuti Guilliman of the Ultramarines. The meeting between these two exemplified everything that would later drive the legions apart. Guilliman, already working on his Codex Astartes and developing standardized doctrines for Space Marine warfare, represented order, predictability, and adherence to military theory refined through thousands of campaigns. Alpharius represented the opposite: fluid tactics that changed with every engagement, operations that violated accepted military doctrine, and a willingness to use methods that other legions considered dishonourable or beneath them. When the Alpha Legion was tasked with bringing the world of Testra Prime into compliance, Guilliman observed their methods with growing disapproval. Rather than a straightforward military conquest, Alpharius orchestrated a complex infiltration that saw the planet's government collapse from within, achieved through blackmail, assassination, and the manipulation of existing political factions. The world fell to imperial rule without a single shot being fired in open battle, yet Guilliman saw only dishonourable scheming where Alpharius saw elegant efficiency. The confrontation between the two Primarchs became legendary within the Legion. Guilliman argued that such methods were unworthy of Space Marines, that the Emperor's Angels of Death should inspire awe through their martial prowess, not fear through subterfuge. Alpharius countered that dead Imperials didn't benefit from glorious last stands, that preserved infrastructure was more valuable than radioactive rubble, and that winning battles was meaningless if you lost the peace that followed. Neither Primarch could convince the other, and they parted with mutual disdain. Guilliman saw Alpharius as a schemer who relied on tricks rather than true military skill. Alpharius saw Guilliman as a rigid theorist, whose by-the-book approach got people killed unnecessarily. This philosophical divide would have consequences that echoed through the heresy and beyond, eventually leading to their final, fatal confrontation on Eskrador. Alpharius's relationship with Horus Lupercal proved far warmer, which makes sense given that Horus was likely responsible for discovering his youngest brother and introducing him to the wider Imperium. The War Master understood and appreciated the value of unconventional warfare, having employed similar tactics himself when the situation demanded. More importantly, Horus treated Alpharius as an equal rather than an upstart, respected his abilities rather than denigrating his methods. For a Primarch who arrived late to the Great Crusade, who commanded a legion that other legions whispered about with suspicion and distrust, this acceptance meant everything. The Alpha Legion worked closely with Horus's forces on multiple campaigns, and Alpharius clearly admired the War Master's strategic brilliance and charisma. When the time came to choose sides in the great civil war that would tear the Imperium apart, this personal connection would weigh heavily in Alpharius's calculations. But before we can understand the choice that defined the Alpha Legion's role in the Horus Heresy, we must examine the moment that presented that choice, the meeting with the Cabal. Approximately 2 years before the heresy began in earnest, while the Alpha Legion conducted a campaign of Imperial compliance on the world of Nurth, Alpharius and Omegon were approached by an agent named John Grammaticus, a perpetual human serving a mysterious Xenos organization that called itself the Cabal. This ancient alliance of disparate alien species claimed to have fought the forces of chaos, which they termed the Primordial Annihilator, for eons beyond human reckoning. They possessed the Acuity, a device or ability that allowed them to glimpse possible futures with frightening accuracy, and what they had seen of humanity's future filled them with enough dread that they had decided to intervene directly in Imperial affairs, on the dead world of 42 Hydra Tertius, in a terraformed region that the Cabal had prepared specifically for this meeting. The twin Primarchs were shown 2 visions of the future. In the first vision, the Emperor would defeat Horus in the coming civil war, striking down his favoured son but suffering a mortal wound in the process. The Emperor would be interred upon the Golden Throne, neither fully alive nor truly dead, a howling spectre of torment that would persist for 10 or 20,000 years. During this time, the Imperium would stagnate, decay, and slowly corrupt. Chaos would grow ever stronger, fed by humanity's suffering and the Emperor's psychic screams, until finally, inevitably, the entire galaxy would be consumed by the warp. In the second vision, Horus would triumph, killing the Emperor and assuming mastery over humanity. But without his father's guiding hand, and eaten away by the last remaining fragment of his former honour, Horus would turn on his own forces in self-loathing, accelerating the internecine warfare among the traitor legions. Within 2 or 3 generations, humanity would be extinct, consumed in an orgy of self-destruction. But with humanity's death would come the starvation and ultimate destruction of the Chaos Gods themselves, saving the galaxy from their depredations. The Cabal presented this as a binary choice, and they asked Alpharius and Omegon to do the unthinkable, betray the Emperor they served, join Horus's rebellion and actively work to ensure the War Master's victory, sacrifice humanity to save the galaxy. The twins' immediate reaction was one of outrage and denial. Their loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium was absolute, forged in decades of crusading to bring humanity's scattered children under one banner. But as they processed the visions, as they considered the long game that the Cabal was playing, something shifted in their thinking. According to witnesses, both Primarchs staggered back and screamed in unison, "The Alpha Legion has always been for the Emperor." This statement, perhaps more than any other, encapsulates the impossible contradiction at the heart of the Alpha Legion's actions during the heresy. They would betray the Emperor to serve the Emperor. They would join chaos to destroy chaos. They would become traitors out of ultimate loyalty. The twins reasoned that if these truly were the only two possible futures, if the Cabal's predictions were accurate, then the Emperor himself would choose the path that destroyed chaos forever, even at the cost of humanity's extinction. The Emperor had always taken the long view, had made terrible sacrifices for what he saw as the greater good. Would he not sacrifice even himself, even his species, to eliminate the existential threat that chaos represented? By this logic, by siding with Horus and ensuring his victory, Alpharius and Omegon would be serving their father's true will, even as they raised weapons against him. It was a calculation that only they, with their unique perspective and training in thinking beyond conventional morality, could make. Whether this reasoning was sound, or merely a rationalization for actions they had already decided upon, whether the Cabal told them the truth or manipulated them with partial information, these questions have never been answered satisfactorily. What we know with certainty is that the Alpha Legion's actions during the Horus Heresy remain the most contradictory and confusing of any legion involved in that galaxy-spanning civil war. When Horus's treachery was revealed and loyalist forces were called to punish the traitor legions at Istvan V, the Alpha Legion appeared among the supposed loyalist reinforcements. Alongside the Iron Warriors, Night Lords and Word-Bearers, they turned their guns on the unsuspecting loyalists in what became known as the Drop Site Massacre, slaughtering thousands of Imperial Fists, Raven Guard, and Salamander Space Marines in a coordinated ambush. The 20th Legion's involvement in planning this trap was undeniable, and their precision in executing the betrayal marked them as traitors beyond redemption. Yet even here, details remain murky. Some accounts suggest that Alpha Legion forces actively helped Raven Guard survivors escape the immediate aftermath of the massacre, shepherding them to safety even as other traitor forces hunted them. Was this a momentary lapse, a faction within the Legion acting independently, or part of a deeper plan? The operations against the Raven Guard that followed provide more evidence of the Alpha Legion's conflicted loyalties. The Cabal had informed Alpharius that the Raven Guard would come into possession of something valuable that needed to be destroyed if Horus's rebellion was to succeed: the Emperor's original Primarch gene stock and the knowledge to use it. This was perhaps the Emperor's most precious secret, the template that had created the Primarchs themselves, capable of allowing Corvus Corax to rebuild his shattered legion at unprecedented speed. The Alpha Legion infiltrated the Raven Guard through a terrifyingly effective operation, using their apothecaries to graft the faces of dead Raven Guard onto living Alpha Legionnaires, then inserting these false brothers into Corax's ranks. These infiltrators fed information back to Omegon, who personally directed the operation, and when the time came they stole both the original gene stock and all related data. But rather than destroying this treasure as the Cabal had instructed, the Alpha Legion kept it for themselves. They handed over incomplete data to Horus, who gave it to Fabius Bile for study, but the true prize remained in Alpha Legion hands. The Cabal's representative assigned to oversee this mission was unceremoniously eliminated, tossed into the void, and Omegon made it clear that the 20th Legion would fulfill their obligations in their own way, without external interference or control. What they planned to do with the Primarch gene stock remains one of the heresy's great mysteries. Did they intend to create their own Primarchs, expand their legion beyond all other forces, the The gene stock and the data have never surfaced again in Imperial records, suggesting the Alpha Legion either still possesses this secret or destroyed it at some point during the subsequent 10,000 years. The incident with the White Scars provides even more evidence of divergent agendas within the Alpha Legion, possibly even between Alpharius and Omegon themselves. Horus had ordered the 20th Legion to recruit Jagatai Khan and his 5th Legion to the traitor cause, knowing that the Khan's swift forces would be invaluable in the coming assault on Terra. Instead of following these orders directly, an Alpha Legion fleet blockaded the White Scars at the Kondak system, preventing them from learning about the larger civil war unfolding across the galaxy. At the same time, other Alpha Legion forces worked to destroy an astropathic relay that was preventing messages from reaching the Khan. When this relay was destroyed in what appeared to be a suicide mission, the White Scars finally received a message from Rogal Dorn warning them of Horus's treachery. The blockading Alpha Legion fleet then engaged in hostile actions that seemed designed to provoke the White Scars into breaking through to join the Loyalist forces, directly contradicting their orders from Horus. Was this Omegon acting against Alpharius's plans? Were both twins in agreement that the White Scars needed to remain with the Loyalists to prevent Horus's certain victory? Or were these actions part of a deeper strategy that required the appearance of betrayal while actually maintaining loyalty to Horus? The answer might have died with Alpharius himself on the frozen surface of Pluto's moon Hydra. As the heresy progressed and Horus prepared for the final assault on Terra itself, the Alpha Legion was tasked with sowing chaos throughout the Sol system to ease the traitor forces' approach. Sleeper cells that had been planted years earlier, long before the heresy, suddenly activated across the system. Acts of sabotage, terrorism and murder erupted on multiple worlds simultaneously. The Alpha Legion infiltrated even the Imperial Palace itself, destroying all the statues in the Investiry except for 2, those of Alpharius and Rogal Dorn, a clear message and challenge to the Praetorian of Terra. The true target of the Alpha Legion's offensive was Pluto and its network of fortress moons, particularly Hydra, which housed the Sol system's primary astropathic monitoring station. If this facility fell, Terra would be blinded to threats approaching from the outer system, unable to coordinate defensive responses. Alpharius personally led a strike force in an audacious operation, having used a stasis field technique to drift his fleet into the Sol system undetected over the course of a year. The ships powered down to minimize their heat signatures and make them appear as derelict hulks. The attack was proceeding perfectly, with multiple moons falling to Alpha Legion forces, when Rogal Dorn himself arrived with a massive fleet of Imperial fists, having used a brilliant gravitational slingshot maneuver to cover the vast distance from Terra to Pluto in record time. What followed was a confrontation between 2 Primarchs representing diametrically opposed philosophies of warfare. Dorn, master of siege warfare and defensive fortifications, who believed in strength, honour and straightforward application of force. Alpharius, master of deception and misdirection, who believed that the most elegant victory was won where the enemy never saw the blow coming. The battle between their forces raged across multiple moons, but the decisive moment came when Dorn led his Huskarl Terminators in a teleportation assault directly into the astropathic chamber on Hydra, where Alpharius stood with his own elite Linnaean Terminators. The 2 Primarchs faced each other, and in that moment Alpharius made one final attempt to sway his brother to the truth of his cause. He spoke of the greater picture, of true victory, of the future that required these terrible actions. Dorn, perhaps unsurprisingly, was not interested in speeches. He attacked. The duel that followed was swift and brutal, a clash between a warrior who had spent his entire existence preparing for straightforward combat, and one who had always relied on never being in a fair fight in the first place. Alpharius fought skillfully, wielding the pale spear with the precision of one trained by the Emperor himself, and for a moment it seemed he might actually defeat Dorn, poised to drive the spear through his brother's body. But Dorn had seen the strike coming. recognising a technique he had faced before in combat against a monstrous orc warlord decades earlier. Rather than dodge, Dorn deliberately stepped into the spear's path, taking the blow in his shoulder to pin the weapon and Alpharius's position. Using his free hand and his mighty chain sword Storm's teeth, Dorn sliced through both of Alpharius's wrists, severing his hands, then slashed him across the chest before impaling him with his own pale spear. The final blow was a devastating chop of Storm's teeth through the top of Alpharius's skull, splitting his head nearly in half. At the moment of death, across the vast gulfs of space on the traitor fleet, Omegon felt something break inside himself, a psychic wound that no apothecary could treat. The soul that had been shared between two bodies was now housed in only one, and the surviving twin became distant, withdrawn, processing a loss that no one else could truly understand. The Alpha Legion fleet withdrew from Pluto, and the Harrowmaster Kelsolonius seemed almost unconcerned by the Primarch's death, noting that all in the Legion are one. But Omegon knew differently. He was now alone in a way he had never been before, the other half of his soul torn away by Dorn's blade. Yet the mission, whatever it truly was, continued. Omegon assumed his brother's identity, becoming Alpharius to the rest of the traitor forces and even to much of his own legion. He appeared before Horus on Ulanor during the muster for the Siege of Terra, presenting the War Master with detailed maps of the Sol System's defences before mysteriously withdrawing the Alpha Legion from the final assault on Terra, defying Horus's direct orders. Instead of joining the siege, the Alpha Legion focused on delaying Robuti Guilliman's advance from Ultramar, harrying his fleet with hit-and-run attacks designed to prevent him from reaching Terra in time to reinforce the Loyalist defenders. This operation succeeded brilliantly, keeping the Ultramarines out of the critical final battle, yet it also ensured that Horus would face the Emperor, sanguineous, and Rogal Dorn without his full strength. Was this Omegon subtly working to ensure Horus's defeat, the future the Cabal had warned against? Or was it merely sound strategy to keep the most dangerous Loyalist reinforcements tied up elsewhere? The heresy ended with Horus's death, and the Emperor's interment upon the Golden Throne. The exact future the Cabal had predicted would lead to humanity's slow corruption and eventual consumption by chaos. By this metric, the Alpha Legion had failed in their stated goal of ensuring Horus's victory, or had they succeeded in a goal they never shared with the Cabal? In the aftermath of the heresy, during the Great Scouring when Loyalist forces hunted down traitor remnants across the galaxy, the Alpha Legion continued their contradictory behaviour. Rather than fleeing to the Eye of Terror with the other traitor legions, they moved eastward toward Ultramar, seemingly seeking confrontation with Robuti Guilliman specifically. On the world of Eskrador, the two Primarchs who had clashed philosophically during the Great Crusade would meet in battle one final time. Guilliman, perhaps learning from his previous encounters with the Alpha Legion's unpredictable tactics, deliberately abandoned his own Codex doctrines to set a trap. A strike force led by Guilliman himself made a lightning assault on what appeared to be the Alpha Legion's headquarters, catching Alpharius by surprise. The two Primarchs faced each other in single combat, and Guilliman struck down his opponent, seemingly killing Alpharius for the second time. The Ultramarines believed the battle won, that no legion could survive the death of their Primarch. They were wrong. A day later, the supposedly leaderless Alpha Legion launched a devastating series of counterattacks that nearly destroyed the Ultramarines' force. Guilliman was forced to withdraw from Eskrador entirely, ordering massive orbital bombardment to finish the job his ground forces couldn't complete. This raised the obvious question: had Guilliman actually killed Omegon? Or had he merely killed another body double, another enhanced legionnaire modified to play the role of Primarch? The Alpha Legion symbol, the hydra, takes its name from the multi-headed serpent of ancient Terran myth, a creature that could survive having its heads cut off. This legend reflects the Legion's structure and doctrine perfectly. Cut off one head, and 2 more take its place, kill 1 commander, and 3 others are ready to assume control. The death of a Primarch, which would devastate any other legion, barely slowed the Alpha Legion's operations. In the 10 millennia since the Heresy, the Alpha Legion has evolved into something unique even among Chaos Space Marine forces. Unlike the other traitor legions which fled to the Eye of Terror and became twisted by the Warp's influence, the Alpha Legion rarely operates within that demon-haunted realm. This has spared them from the time dilation effects that affect other Chaos Marines, meaning that Alpha Legion warriors 10,000 years after the Heresy are not necessarily ancient by their own subjective experience. More remarkably, the Legion appears to still be actively recruiting and creating new Space Marines, something that should be impossible for a traitor force cut off from the Imperium's infrastructure. Inquisitor Craven claimed that the Alpha Legion maintains hidden bases within Imperial territory, capturing gene seed, modifying aspirants, and training new warriors using stolen Imperial technology. Whether Craven's information was accurate or merely more Alpha Legion disinformation is uncertain, as the Inquisitor himself disappeared shortly after making his report. The organisational structure of the modern Alpha Legion resembles a collection of independent cells rather than a unified force. Each warband operates autonomously, conducting its own operations with little apparent coordination with other Alpha Legion forces. Yet these cells somehow still work toward common goals, suggesting either a hidden command structure that continues to coordinate activities, or a shared doctrine so deeply ingrained that no central authority is necessary. When Imperial forces have successfully assassinated what appeared to be high-ranking Alpha Legion commanders, these deaths have had minimal impact on overall Legion operations, the Hydra's many heads functioning regardless of which ones are severed. This cellular structure makes the Alpha Legion nearly impossible to eliminate entirely. You can destroy individual warbands, but you can never be certain you found them all, and the ones you miss will rebuild and return. The tactics employed by modern Alpha Legion forces remain true to their Heresy-era doctrine. Rather than massing for open battle, they infiltrate Imperial systems years or decades in advance, planting sleeper agents who live normal lives until activation. They corrupt planetary defense forces from within, turn Imperial Guard regiments against their commanders, and orchestrate uprisings that appear spontaneous, but are actually carefully choreographed. When the Alpha Legion finally reveals itself, the real fighting is already over, the enemy's capacity for resistance already destroyed by internal sabotage and psychological warfare. They excel at turning Imperial forces against each other, manufacturing false intelligence that sends loyalist armies to fight each other while Alpha Legion forces watch from the shadows. A favourite tactic involves disguising Alpha Legion Marines as loyalist Space Marines, using stolen power armour and identity markers to commit atrocities that get attributed to innocent chapters, sowing distrust within the Imperium's most elite forces. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the modern Alpha Legion is the uncertainty surrounding their true allegiance. Throughout the Imperium, rumours persist of Alpha Legion warbands conducting operations against Chaos forces, sabotaging traitor positions, and mysteriously aiding Imperial victories. At the same time, Chaos forces boast of Alpha Legion warriors striking at the Imperium from within, conducting black operations that further the Dark God's aims. Which version is true? The horrifying answer might be both. Some Alpha Legion cells may genuinely believe they serve the Emperor's greater purpose, while others have fully embraced chaos. Still others might be playing both sides, pursuing their own inscrutable agendas that align with neither the Imperium nor the ruinous powers. The genius of this approach is that it makes the Alpha Legion's actions essentially unpredictable. You cannot anticipate their strategy if even they don't agree on what their strategy is. You cannot counter their plans if their plans deliberately contradict each other. This brings us back to the central mystery that has defined the Alpha Legion from the beginning. What are they actually trying to accomplish? If we believe they truly chose to serve Horus in order to destroy chaos by ensuring humanity's extinction, then the Emperor's victory represented their failure, yet their actions during the Heresy seemed calculated to ensure that very outcome. Did they change their minds partway through? deciding that the Cabal had lied or that humanity was worth saving despite the predictions? Did Alpharius and Omegon disagree on the correct course, leading to the seemingly contradictory operations we observe? Or is there a third explanation, a strategy so labyrinthine that even 10,000 years later we still haven't seen its full scope? Consider the possibility that the Alpha Legion never truly believed the Cabal's predictions, that they saw through the manipulation from the start. The Cabal presented a binary choice, but perhaps Alpharius and Omegon recognise that binary choices are often false constructs, that there are always more options than the ones presented. By appearing to side with Horus while simultaneously undermining his efforts, by ensuring neither a complete loyalist victory nor a total traitor triumph, perhaps they created a third outcome, one where humanity survived but remained vigilant against chaos, where the Emperor became a rallying symbol rather than a living tyrant, where the Imperium remained strong enough to resist external threats while being internally divided enough to prevent the stagnation the Cabal predicted. Or consider the darker possibility that everything the Alpha Legion does, every apparent contradiction, every mysterious action, is simply because they no longer remember their original purpose. Alpharius is dead, killed by Dorn on Pluto. Omegon is likely dead as well, killed by Guilliman on Eskrador. The Primarchs who made the choice to embrace the Cabal's mission are gone, and what remains is a legion following doctrines established 10 millennia ago by leaders who no longer exist to explain the reasoning behind those doctrines. The Alpha Legion continues to operate in the shadows, continues to deceive and manipulate, continues to play both sides against each other, because that's what the Alpha Legion does. The mission may have been lost somewhere in the 10,000 years since the heresy, replaced by perpetual motion, a conspiracy that continues purely because stopping would mean admitting that perhaps there was never a point to begin with. The truth about Alpharius Omegon, about their legion and its motivations, may be the ultimate expression of the grimdark nature of Warhammer 40,000. In a setting where there are no good choices, only degrees of terrible, the Alpha Legion represents the logical endpoint of consequentialist thinking. They made the calculation that the ends justified the means, that betraying everything they believed in was acceptable if it served a greater purpose. But in a universe where chaos corrupts all it touches, where good intentions pave the road to damnation, and where prophecies have a way of becoming self-fulfilling, the Alpha Legion's actions may have achieved nothing except to ensure that they themselves became what they fought against. They betrayed the Emperor to serve the Emperor, and in doing so, they became traitors in truth, unable to ever return to the light they claimed to be protecting. The legacy of Alpharius Omegon is written in shadow and doubt. No other Primarch has died so many times, yet might still live. No other legion has so thoroughly blurred the line between loyalty and betrayal that both concepts lose all meaning. They are the knife you never see coming, the ally who might be your enemy, the enemy who might be your ally. They are the whisper of paranoia that turns Imperial commanders against their own trusted advisors, the seed of doubt that grows into full-blown suspicion. They are proof that in the grim darkness of the far future, you cannot trust anyone, not even yourself, because you might actually be Alpharius. The sheer audacity of the Alpha Legion's approach to warfare and their Primarch's legacy deserves a moment of reflection. Where other Chaos forces rage and destroy, where Loyalist chapters stand and defend, the Alpha Legion simply smiles from the shadows and asks, "Are you certain you know which side you're on? Are you certain you know which side we're on? Are you even certain that sides exist? Or are they just another construct we've led you to believe in while we accomplish our actual goals?" The genius of Alpharius and Omegon's legacy is that it transforms every battle into an intelligence operation, every alliance into a potential trap, every victory into a possible component of your enemy's true plan. How do you fight an enemy who might be trying to lose? How do you accept help from an ally who might be trying to make you win in a way that actually serves their purposes? In the current era of Warhammer 40,000, with the return of Roboute Guilliman and the introduction of the Primarch Space Marines, the question of the Alpha Legion status becomes even more complex. If Omegon somehow survived Eskrador, if either of the twin Primarchs yet lives in some hidden corner of the galaxy, what would they make of the modern Imperium? Would they see Guilliman's return as validation that the Emperor's plan could succeed, or as evidence that the Cabal was right about stagnation and decay? Would they see the Primarchs as a threat or an opportunity? The fact that we cannot answer these questions definitively, that every possibility seems equally plausible, demonstrates just how successfully Alpharius and Omegon have poisoned the well of certainty in Warhammer's setting. The physical legacy of the Alpha Legion is equally fascinating from a tabletop perspective. When Games Workshop released rules for playing Horus Heresy armies, Alpharius received unique abilities that perfectly captured his character. He can hide within his own units, forcing opponents to guess which squad actually contains the Primarch. He grants his entire army re-roll abilities that represent their careful planning and coordination. He's physically less imposing than other Primarchs in direct combat, but compensates through superior tactical flexibility. Modern Chaos Space Marine codexes have continued this theme, giving Alpha Legion armies abilities focused on deployment tricks, positioning advantages and misdirection. They can redeploy units after seeing enemy setup, they become harder to hit at range, and they can use stratagems that represent springing traps and false flag operations. Playing an Alpha Legion army means playing mind games with your opponent before the first dice roll. This extends to the painting and modelling aspect of the hobby. Alpha Legion players often paint their armies in the distinctive scaled blue-green armour that represents one of the most technically challenging schemes in Warhammer. The layered colours that shift depending on viewing angle, the metallic sheen that catches light differently than standard power armour, the hydra imagery that decorates every surface, all of this requires significant skill to execute well. Yet this difficulty makes sense thematically. The Alpha Legion shouldn't be easy to understand or replicate. They should require effort, planning, and attention to detail, just like their battlefield operations. Some Alpha Legion players take the I am Alpharius concept to amusing extremes, converting every model to have identifying marks obscured, or painting entirely separate armies in the colour schemes of other chapters but with subtle Alpha Legion tells hidden in the details. The novels and lore surrounding Alpharius and the Alpha Legion represent some of Black Library's most engaging writing. Dan Abnett's Legion was a masterclass in unreliable narration and plot twists presenting multiple possible interpretations of events and leaving readers genuinely uncertain about what actually happened. John French's Praetorian of Dorn gave us the first apparent death of Alpharius and explored the cost of the Legion's deceptive methods. These stories work because they embrace the uncertainty, because they understand that explaining everything would destroy the essential nature of the Alpha Legion. A mystery fully explained ceases to be mysterious, and the Alpha Legion must remain mysterious to function as intended in the setting. This creates a fascinating challenge for writers. How do you tell compelling stories about characters whose defining trait is that we can never fully understand them? The relationship between Alpharius and his Genesons deserves additional examination. Most Space Marine legions are defined by their resemblance to their Primarchs' most obvious traits. The Blood Angels are artistic and noble like Sanguinius. The Space Wolves are savage and loyal like Leman Russ. The Ultramarines are strategic and organised like Guilliman. But the Alpha Legion took this mimicry to its logical extreme. Through careful gene selection and modification, they created warriors who not only thought like Alpharius, but could physically pass as him. The early generations of the Legion were deliberately engineered to be taller than standard Space Marines, specifically to make the deception easier. This represents a fundamental difference in how Alpharius approached leadership. Where other Primarchs stood apart from their sons, towering figures of authority, Alpharius diminished himself to their level, or perhaps elevated them to his, creating a legion where the line between commander and commanded was deliberately blurred. This approach fostered an unusual level of operational independence within the Alpha Legion. Squad leaders were expected to operate without direct oversight. to understand the overall strategic picture well enough to make decisions that served the Legion's goals even without orders. This made the Alpha Legion resistant to conventional decapitation strikes. Killing the commander didn't matter because every legionnaire was trained to be the commander. But it also created a legion that could fracture easily, where individual warbands might pursue contradictory goals while believing they served the same ultimate purpose. In the 10,000 years since the Heresy, this has resulted in an Alpha Legion that barely qualifies as a unified force, more a collection of cells that share a common heritage and methodology, but not necessarily a common cause. The tragedy of Alpharius and Omegon, if we can call it that, lies in how their greatest strength became their ultimate weakness. Their ability to think beyond conventional morality, to make the hard choices that other Primarchs wouldn't consider, led them to make a choice that may have doomed everything they fought to protect. They saw the binary presented by the Cabal, recognized that both options were terrible, and tried to create a third way through sheer cleverness and misdirection. But cleverness has its limits in a universe where the Chaos Gods can literally reshape reality, where prophecies can be self-fulfilling, and where the best-laid plans can be corrupted by the very act of implementing them. The twins thought they could outthink the dark powers, that they could betray the Emperor to serve the Emperor, that they could walk the knife's edge between loyalty and treachery without falling to either side. Whether they succeeded or failed remains one of Warhammer 40,000's greatest questions. As we close this examination of the most mysterious Primarch, we're left with more questions than answers, and that's exactly as it should be. Alpharius Omegon represents the ultimate unreliable narrator, the character whose every statement might be true, might be false, or might be true in ways we don't yet understand. They are the Primarch who died twice but might not have died at all, who betrayed the Emperor while claiming ultimate loyalty, who fought for Horus while sabotaging his cause. They are Schrödinger's traitor, simultaneously loyal and treacherous until observed, at which point they become whichever serves their purposes better. The Alpha Legion they created continues this tradition, an army of ghosts who might be the Imperium's last line of defence or its greatest internal threat, and we may never know which. The question, who is Alpharius, has become a joke in the Warhammer community, a meme that players and fans reference constantly. But beneath the humour lies a genuinely unsettling truth. In a setting defined by certainty, by clear divisions between good and evil, even when both sides are terrible, the Alpha Legion represents radical uncertainty. They remind us that the person standing next to you might be your enemy, that your enemy might actually be trying to help you, and that even 10,000 years of history might not be enough to unravel a sufficiently complex deception. Alpharius and Omegon taught their legion that the greatest weapon isn't strength or speed or psychic power, it's doubt. Make your enemy doubt their information, doubt their allies, doubt their own perceptions, and you've won before the first shot is fired. So the next time you see an Alpha Legion army on the tabletop, or read about their operations in a Black Library novel, or hear someone say, "I am Alpharius," remember that you're witnessing the legacy of two Primarchs, who decided that the only way to win an unwinnable war was to make sure no one could tell who had actually won. You're seeing the result of a plan that might have started 10,000 years ago and might not conclude for another 10,000 years. You're encountering an enemy who might be a friend who might be an enemy, and in either case, you'll never be completely certain which is which. And isn't that just perfect for a setting where there is only war? If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the mysteries of Alpharius Omegon and the Alpha Legion, let me know in the comments what other aspects of Warhammer 40,000's lore you'd like to see explored. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Obsidian Scriptorium for more comprehensive examinations of the grimdark universe we all love. Whether you're Team Alpharius, Team Omegon, or Team They're Both Still Alive and Playing Everyone, there's always more to discuss about the Hydra's many heads. Until next time, remember, you might be Alpharius, I might be Alpharius, we might all be Alpharius, or maybe that's exactly what Alpharius wants us to think. Hydra Dominatus.